And I think it's important to make sure that companies understand what's actually driving the revenue vehicle.
We are back with another episode of Go-to-Market Excellence, and I'm pleased to be joined by Brian Froehling today. He is the Executive Vice President and Head of Global Sales at Brightcove, one of the world's leading online video platforms for business. He's held sales leadership positions at CA Technologies, Pivotal Software, and Symantec. Brian, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Dan.
And we're glad to have you. So you told me before we turned the recording on today that there's this notion out there that all salespeople are coin operated. What's up with that? Where did that idea come from in the first place? What does it mean, and why are you so opposed to that viewpoint?
Yeah, so I don't want to dismiss the fact that salespeople like to make money, because certainly, like everyone else, they do. But I think as a senior leadership team, there's this, kind of saying that gets repeated again and again, which is salespeople are coin operated. And what I think is a more accurate statement is that salespeople are performance driven, right? So as opposed to being coin operated, they're performance operated. And part of what I dislike about the statement is that it improperly frames how to motivate salespeople. Right, it improperly frames that we can just throw spiffs at people and throw cashes in double bonus. And really what people in sales want to see is that they're the best at what they do. And unfortunately in sales, one of the few ways we have to measure how good they are is how much money they make. Right? It's one of the few professions where, by and large, the scoreboard is a W-2. And there are more thoughtful ways to do measurement. So where I see this manifest itself in a really ugly way is, a lot of times companies build out their quotas based on a lot of the mathematical formulas of what great companies should look like. They roll out quotas. We get halfway through the year and we go, uh-oh, the salespeople aren't making enough money because the quotas are too high. We can't go adjust the quotas. So what we'll do is we'll pay people double commissions or triple commissions. We'll roll these spiffs out or find ways to keep our sales force engaged and not leave the company, because they're not going to work here for half price, because most salespeople are on, let's call it 50-50 compensation plans. And I've experienced so many sales reps that are making more than their on target earnings, right? So these are people that sign up and they say, if I do well, I'll make X, and they're actually making more than X, but they're at 78% of plan or 82% of plan, and they're wildly dejected. Their morale is low. And I look at them and Dan, I say, boy, I'm confused. You're making more money than you signed up to make. You're a coin operated salesperson. You should be ecstatic. And they say, no, I like to win. I like to exceed my goals. Getting paid is a byproduct of that. But when I look up at the scoreboard and I see that I'm at 81% of plan, I'm someone that likes to be at 120% of plan. I feel like a loser.
But you're saying that they're still hitting their OTE because of these spiffs that companies are throwing at them just to keep them keep them from leaving.
Correct. And what you end up with is paying all of the dollars out to retain your sales force, but you also end up with a demotivated sales force, a dejected sales force, a sales force with a low morale. So they're making enough money that they stay, but because the scoreboard says they're not a high performer, they have a low self-image, they have low job satisfaction. It shows up in employee surveys. When people say, should I come work for your company? They look around and they go, no one's really making their numbers. Our company must not be doing well, even though often the companies are doing extraordinarily well and people are getting paid, really well. I'll give you a personal story, Dan.
Yeah.
A bit of an embarrassing one, maybe. But in my building, we have 2 Peloton bikes. And I'm not exactly what you would consider a world-class athlete, but I get down there and like to try to keep in relatively good shape. And I start working at the Peloton. It's tracking my scores, and I look kind of relative to the rest of the people. And when I start on the bike, I'm maybe in the top 30%. Now, there's some really out-of-shape people on these bikes. But there's also some great athletes, and I'm moving up from 30th percent to 20th percent to 15th percent to 10th percent, and I'm bragging to my wife, and I'm getting excited, and I creep into the top 5%, and around the top 5%, I begin to peter out because there's some real athletes in that top 5%. But I'm, consistently the 5th or 6th percentile. I'm feeling great about the bike, and I'm losing weight, and I'm getting in great shape. And again, there's two bikes, and I always take the one on the right because there's a fan, and I like to stay cool. Well, one day someone's on the right bike, so I come down and I ride the left bike, and I finish up at like the 17th percent. And I just go, I had an off day. I didn't get a good night's sleep. I'll come back again and ride that bike and get back to the top 5%. I get on the bike, and sure enough, 17%. So I do what any smart person would do. I go to the front desk and complain and tell them the left bike is calibrated wrong, right? This left bike, I always ride. I'm always in the top 5%. The left bike is telling me I'm at the 17th percentile. Clearly, it's calibrated wrong. Get the Peloton people out here and get it fixed. They call me 2 days later. Hello, Mr. Froehling. Want to give you an update on the bikes. We had Peloton out, and you're absolutely right. There's a configuration issue on the bike. But it's not the left bike that's misconfigured. It's the right bike. The right bike runs way too easy. They had to tighten the resistance on it. And people were getting these incredible scores that, weren't really pedaling that hard.
So what did that do to your morale?
Well, it crushed my morale. I had to realize that I wasn't creeping up on Lance Armstrong's scores. But the more interesting thing psychologically to me is it disincentivized me from getting on the bike. Every time I would get on from there forward, I would see my previous scores when I thought I was a high performer, and those goals felt unattainable. And I would also see the scores, and it wasn't calibrated with how I viewed myself. I began to view myself as an athlete. Now I had to look into this world where the computer was telling me, hey, you're not that good. And it made me exercise less, work out less, and enjoy the process less. And the same thing manifests itself in quotas. If we set quotas wrong, regardless of how we pay our people, and this gets kind of full circle back to the coin-operated component where we say people are coin-operated, even if we pay them, which we ultimately do, right? If we over-quota people, we end up doing these spiffs and double payment and second half bonus to try to keep our people engaged. They still look at the scoreboard and they see low performance, and it makes their job satisfaction drop, which shows itself in the level of effort they put in and the ultimate revenue they produce and in the work we do for our customers.
Yeah. So where do people go wrong with this? Kind of like, what's the root cause issue of this problem of, it sounds like the problem is overquoting in the first place. So what's the root cause problem?
Well, so there could be multiple root problems, right? It could be genuinely a rep performance issue. It could be, a marketing issue. It could be a pipeline issue. It could be a managerial issue. But it could also be, to your point, an overquoting. And I think some of the problem, Dan, and not all of the problem, and I'll probably get several calls from sales reps that work for me after this saying, hey, that is the problem, is, as companies get larger, we build our financial models off of various formulas. So, we get these metrics back that say a great company will have a, expense to booking, or the amount of money I pay a rep compared to their quota of 5.3 to 1. So if I'm going to pay a rep $100,000, they need to produce $530,000 of software. Therefore, that's the math. And sometimes we don't take into account, well, is that reality? Is the product market fit one that we're able to generate a 5.3x return on every dollar we spend? Potentially it's higher than that, and we can generate a 10x, right? If product market fit is phenomenal, if marketing spend is phenomenal, if the economic conditions are phenomenal. There are certainly companies that get well above, what great metrics look like. But I think there are also some companies that end up in categories where they're simply not honest with themselves. And they say, hey, the formula says world class, a rep should be able to generate X. Therefore, that's what the quota should look like. But that's just not the case here. And we often think that quota allocation actually equals revenue. So at the beginning of the year, when we do planning, we say, well, boy, we need to hit $1 billion in revenue. Therefore, we need to dole out $1 billion of quota, or even more than $1 billion of quota if you build some buffer in there. And it almost feels like at times there's this belief that if we dole the quota out, the revenue will come, as opposed to taking more of a market or bottoms up view, saying, hey, how much demand is there for our product, and map that back to sales capacity, and then figure out what quota should be.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. And, I think oftentimes, and I know you guys are publicly traded, but for other companies who are maybe investor-backed, the investors are the ones, they pour the money into the company, and then they say, go hire 10, 20, 30 salespeople to hit the number, as if the number will just come if the people are there. And there's not a thought of, okay, we need to balance top of funnel investments with salesperson capacity, and like you said, market conditions. There's not a concern about market conditions or whether there's enough TAM, for instance. So, what is your role, Ben? What is your role right now in the planning process, and how do you bring your this point of view into that process and influence it?
Yeah. So before I address that, I think it is important to make sure that I'm clear that another part of the problem is the sales reps. So one thing that's happened in our industry is sales reps are demanding higher and higher on-target earnings, right? Theoretical earnings. So these numbers have ticked up, and often reps show up with these, really high expectations of what they should earn. Those numbers, I would say, in the past 10 years have come up 75%. If I think about where we were 10 years ago to now for apples to apples jobs, people are looking for roughly 75% higher on-target earnings. And that drives these formulas to drive these higher and unattainable quotas. So often I hear reps say, well, I'm not going to take a job unless X is my on-target earnings. And you kind of double click down and you find out that, well, to make that math work, the company has to assign them this big quota. That's simply not achievable. Hold on one second, Dan.
Yeah, take your time.
I forgot I had a housekeeping crew show up.
Take your time.
Hey guys, how are you? Hey, I am recording a podcast for work for probably the next half hour, Dan?
Yeah. Yes.
Probably the next half hour, so I'm going to need you guys to be super quiet and not walk behind me. Is that okay? All right, thank you. Sorry, I forgot it was Fridays.
That's great.
Taking us downstairs.
No
what was
worries
your
at all.
question, Dan?
So where were we? You were talking about the issue.
You had asked a question about I forget.
Yeah. So how you influence the planning process? You have this view that it should be a bottoms-up plan. You should be factoring in all these things, and not just what the company revenue goal is, but you need to be factoring in all these things to make sure the quotas are realistic and you're planning properly.
Yeah.
So how do you influence, how has your view on this influenced the executive team's planning process? And just share your experience working with, I guess, finance and RevOps with this.
Yeah. No, it's a great question. It really varies company to company, but the most important thing is not just to get caught up in the formulas. So, for example, I've worked at certain companies in the past. Like, for example, when I worked at Pivotal, we had a phenomenal product market fit. Mm-hmm. And the primary engine that drove growth was sales capacity. So you could literally look and say, if I have 10 salespeople, the average salesperson will produce X. And I can grow to 20, 30, 40. And by and large, I get linear output. There are some companies that you look at and you say, boy, almost all of my growth is a function of marketing, right? It's a function of how much top of the funnel marketing comes in that can then fill up the sales capacity. And I think it's important to make sure that companies understand what's actually driving the revenue vehicle. Is it sales capacity? Is it top of the funnel lead activity? Is it market conditions, et cetera? You can't simply take a blind formula and say, I need to grow by 20%, therefore I need to add 20% more sales capacity, without looking and saying there's a one-to-one correlation between sales capacity and output, because often it shows up somewhere else. Not always. For example, at Pivotal, it was literally a one-to-one. Between, let's call it 10 reps and 100 reps, there was almost a one-to-one correlation between adding capacity to sales organizations. But often it's adding marketing dollars, it's adding additional products, or it's product function. But you have to look at all of those, not just sales capacity in a vacuum.
Could you go in a little more detail about the dynamics that you had going on at Pivotal, where you were able to produce that one-to-one relationship or 1 to 10 relationship between salesperson and output? And what about the product market fit, the sales motion? What about it made you guys have such kind of a repeatable, scalable engine there?
Yeah, at that particular point in time, the whole kind of cloud transformation and every enterprise needs to become a software company was at a fever pitch. And Pivotal had a world-class platform to help people through that transition, but it required a massive amount of one-to-one direct sales rep engaging with a CIO, VP of app dev, CFO, CEO to go through a very, very, very complex sales campaign. There was very little inflow of leads. This wasn't the type of sale you could hire teams of telemarketers to drive content. There wasn't this big brand campaign that drove people in. It was literally hire a world-class transformational software salesperson and have them call on, let's call it the Global 2000. Well, a typical sales rep could only do a good job of this on maybe five accounts.
Yeah.
And boy, if they found someone where it was the right product market fit, it would probably consume, 50 to 100% of their time. So once you were engaged in one of these sales cycles, it was virtually all consuming to an individual sales rep. So if you wanted to hit 2,000, of the Global 2,000, it became simple math. I can only have a rep covering roughly 5 accounts. There's 2,000 divided out, and as you add people, the revenue scales linearly. If you think about other products that might be product led, right? A product like Slack, or a lot of open source products, or products with a low average sale price, you don't have this sharpshooting from salespeople. Instead, what you have is brilliant marketers or an unbelievable product that has scalability built into the product, that's driving leads in, and then you have to have the sales capacity to handle all of those leads. And then most companies kind of fall somewhere in between that, right? Yeah. Most companies, the sales reps are doing a portion of outbounding. There's potentially some peering relationship with a BDR organization that's doing outbounding. Marketing is doing a phenomenal job. The product has a degree of kind of organic spread, and the whole machine is working together. But every company kind of falls somewhere on that spectrum. To be blunt, this is not something an enterprise sales leader would typically say. The further you can get to the sales being generated by the product, right, the more profitable a company is going to be. The utopian world for a software company is the software spreads organically. Customers get exposed to it. It's self-service. They can then come to the website, download it, install it, spread it, and then buy more of it. Because if you look, sales and marketing typically makes up 20 to 30% of revenue for a software company. If you can shrink that number, close to zero, it has a massive impact. And you've seen some companies like Slack or like Zoom pull this off. But there are also companies at the extreme other end where, everything is generated by salespeople out talking to customers and making sure they understand a problem they may never have even acknowledged the fact they had, and then engage in a very, very complex sale that often spans across all parts of the organization, and in the end requires a very large purchase.
Yeah, certainly the latter, those types of companies, it's harder to plan, right? It's harder to, you can put together all the financial modeling you want, but the sales cycles are so long, and so much of it is dependent on having finding somebody at the right time and having the right enterprise salesperson with that prospect. And so what's life like at Brightcove? Is this somewhere in between those two ends of the spectrum?
Yeah, we're certainly somewhere in between those two spectrums. And we disclosed in our earning call that for our premium customers, which are just our larger customers, on average, they spend around $85,000 a year with us. So that's a big enough number that we can have a direct sales force. A fair number of our customers do seven-figure transactions, so in the millions of dollars. But we also have a lot of customers coming through our entry-level products, which are sub $10,000. So we have to have a sales force that can handle all of the inbound leads and going through a traditional funnel where marketing does really brilliant campaigns that result in MQLs that filter through SQLs and ultimately get flipped over to sales reps. But we also have to have sales reps that can engage in outbound campaigns to very senior leaders at very large companies to convince them to do very, very strategic things. And then in a SaaS world, the most important leg of the stool is making sure the customers are wildly successful. So winning the customers is one thing. The most important thing that we have to do is make sure that those customers are super successful, so they choose to renew and expand. And I think the common term we're using in the industry today is net expansion rate. But just think of it as for every customer that spent $1 with me last year, I want them to spend $1.20, $1.40, $1.60 with me next year. And to do that, you have to do a great job delivering on the original promise.
Yeah, I want to get back to that in just a second, but you mentioned you guys have kind of these two different, so you have the more strategic sales, you have the more high velocity sales with smaller companies. Does that make planning difficult for somebody in your position?
In many ways, it makes it easier. So it makes the planning process a little bit more complex, but it makes identifying what the future state looks like a little bit easier. So the as you mentioned, those large deals are very difficult to forecast. Some of it comes down to timing, some of it comes down to luck, some of it comes down to economic conditions, some of it comes down to geography. When you get into the smaller deals, they begin to function a lot more like a machine. So if you end up with a company that's able to sell into kind of all sectors, and by the way, it's not necessarily selling to small companies versus big companies, which we're fortunate we do that. It's also the ability to sell small deals into big companies. Yeah. You're able to get a lot more predictability into your business, and then you're less reliant on the whales, as we sometimes call them, right? The large deals. At my company, those are seven-figure deals. In prior lives, those were eight-figure deals. At some very, very large companies, those are nine-figure deals. You become a lot less reliant on those. The planning process is more complex because you have to look at each one of those revenue streams a bit discretely because they function discretely, but the output and predictability becomes a little bit easier. And then obviously, if you're layering in a mature SaaS company that has an install base, if you're doing the right things on renewals, you're walking into the year with potentially 70+% of your revenue already being able to be mapped out for the full year.
So that's a big number. How do you connect the salesperson who's bringing in the deal with the customer success person who's going to be servicing, ensuring the client is getting their most they will out of your software? What have you put in place, or you and your teammates put in place, to make sure that's a seamless process and it sets the customer up for success? Is there anything that, if someone's listening to this and they're in your role, they're a top revenue person, and they're like, they want to learn, how do I do this like a big time publicly traded company? What do you say?
Yeah, look, so first off, solving this problem is something that I think every single SaaS company is working on, because it is arguably the most important thing we do. And there are some inherent conflicts that exist in the model. So I wouldn't say that we have a silver bullet, but I could walk you through what we do to do the best that we can and make this kind of a continual journey. The first is making sure philosophically that everyone understands at the company that net retention rate is an unbelievably important metric. Mm-hmm. So, we've separated our sales force, like most software companies have, into people that generate the new business, that land the new logos, and a group that makes them happy. And we talk about, one of them in terms of new bookings, and another one is often thought about as retention. What percentage of my business did I retain? And then, for many companies, there's kind of a third category around growth. But the most important thing is getting people to understand that the net retention rate is the most important metric that matters. We've got to bring customers in, they have to renew, they have to grow, they have to be happy, they have to tell other customers how happy they are so that new leads kind of flow into the front end of the funnel. That's the first thing. So, structurally, we try to do some things on the compensation side. Quite frankly, I think some of it is more a demonstration than actually a behavioral change. So, our new business sales reps, a portion of their compensation is tied to the renewal group. The renewal group, a portion of their compensation is tied to the new business. Mm-hmm. I don't know in practice how much having, in our case, 10% of their compensation tied to that other bucket actually changes it. But I think it reinforces kind of that methodology. The next thing is there can't be a kind of throw it over the fence mentality. We can't wait until we close a customer to then go, okay, let us introduce you to this whole separate team that's going to be here to, make you successful. See you later. I've got to go along. We've got to have a smooth transition where we bring, the customer success team, the implementation team, the onboarding team in, much, much, much earlier in the sales cycle. That way there's this, complete end-to-end view. And the most important thing, Dan, that I think many customers miss the boat on is capturing the business problem that our customers are trying to solve, right? Nobody is looking to implement Brightcove, right? There's not a company in the world that says, boy, the utopian situation for me is I have a Brightcove installed, or I have a Pivotal installed, or I have a Semantic installed. No one wants to buy antivirus software. No one wants to buy, no one wants to buy any of this stuff, right? As the late, great Clay Christensen said, people aren't looking to buy drill bits, they're looking to buy holes. Yeah. So the important thing is to make sure that we're capturing what are the business problems that our customers are looking to solve, and that we capture that early in the sales cycle. When we close the deal, we make sure that we capture that in some sort of a document or IT system with the customer saying, hey, you bought our software to solve these business problems. Do we agree on this? The implementation team and customer success team has to understand that success is not installing the software. Success is delivering on those outcomes, which might not come until a period well beyond when the software is actually installed, right? Because most customers can't start using the software and receiving the benefit until that's solved. Yeah. And then making sure there's a process to go back to the customer and say, hey, when you bought our software, here are the business outcomes you bought our software to achieve, and here's how we're doing against them. Because nobody likes to buy software, right? It's not a fun process. It's extraordinarily expensive. We all know the statistics on the amount of software that's bought that gets limited functionality out of it. We all know the fact that there's 4 pieces of enterprise software solving the same problem and all this redundancy, and there's always teams of people looking to remove software. And as vendors, as partners, we have a responsibility to go to our customers and say, we delivered on the business outcomes you bought our software for. Mm-hmm. And if we kind of go through that whole cycle, the rest takes care of itself. There's all kinds of underlying technologies, like Gainsight has a phenomenal platform, and we're pretty big users of Gong that can capture a lot of the data. Certainly, CRM packages are great at recording all of this. There's all kinds of technology to help with this, but the methodology is understand the business problem that you're looking to solve, deliver on that, and report on it.
And you're getting into the next thing I want to talk about, which is talking to customers and getting feedback from them, helping them understanding deeply their problems, and then even letting them know the impact of some of these problems are far greater than they initially thought. And that's, I'm sure, part of the process that you go through with your teams. But I want to talk about the information gathering from customers, because I know you're big on, we talked earlier today about planning and that modeling and spreadsheets and all that, but you're like, get out of the spreadsheets, go talk to customers. Well, in your role as the head of global sales, how do you actually go and talk to customers on a daily basis, and what impacts has that had on your ability to lead the team?
Yeah, look, the simple answer is go do it, right? So I lay my calendar out for a year in advance, and in the same way I block off board meetings, and executive staff meetings, I block off time that I'm going to spend with customers and partners. And that is the most important part of my job, right? I own revenue, which means I own, first and foremost, the employees that take care of our customers. And, second, if not equal, is the actual customers. So I prioritize them on my calendar and let people know that's where I'm spending my time. I think if you don't do that, your calendar gets overrun with, interlock meetings or cross-functional meetings or the bi-weekly one-on-one with some other department that, quite frankly, you can typically do in 5 minutes or over a text message. The simple answer is prioritize it and let everyone know that's where you're spending your time. In a global capacity, you've got to plan your travel out so you're in Europe, you're in Asia, you're in Japan, you're in India, and often plan those 12 weeks in advance is a necessity. It's also important to make sure that I expect that of my leaders and of my leaders' leaders and of my leaders' leaders, and it gets role modeled down to the employee. The pandemic has made this shockingly easy, right?
Yeah.
It used to require, waking up at 5:30 in the morning and getting to the airport and trying to figure out your way through security and hoping your flight didn't get delayed. I live in Atlanta, so dealing with Hartsfield International in 2020 and certainly in 21, 90% of this is happening on Zoom. So the ability to join for sales calls is extraordinarily easy, right? You can do, arguably, I would think 3 to 5 times as many as you could. In the old days being, February of 2020, it was like, let me get an airplane and fly to XYZ and, hopefully the customer doesn't reschedule while I'm on the plane. And while I'm there, I'll see 2 other customers. And in this world, it's, pile on. And the great thing is that's true of all of senior leadership, right? It used to be a work of calendar scheduling weeks in advance to find time to get the CEO on a call or the chief product officer. In a sales world that we're able to do so much over Zoom and Google Meets and Microsoft Team and GoToMeeting, grabbing part of the extended leadership team to spend more and more time, on the phone with customers is great.
Yeah, and
what I like better than being invited to a meeting that is one of these 4-hour interlock meetings that at times make you want to cram a pencil into your eye and saying, sorry, I'm going to be with the CIO or CMO or SVP of a very large Fortune 500 company. Everyone is thrilled that you're not able to show up to the meeting because they know you're spending your time with the people that ultimately pay the bills.
Absolutely. You mentioned a couple minutes ago that you really love Gong at Brightcove, and I'm curious, over the last year and a half, how has kind of being grounded from flying all over the world and being on Zoom and then having those calls recorded on Gong, how has that enabled you to learn so much more about your customers, what they care about, what their problems are, what they're trying to solve?
Yeah. Look, so I am a rabid fan of what Gong does for us. I haven't used the other platforms, so I hear nice things about Chorus. I think Salesforce might have some native tools, but I do love the functionality I get out of Gong. I think it's a really impressive company. But the concept of being able to record and catalog all of your customer interactions, to me, is one of the biggest game changers we've seen in sales in the past decade. So, I always remember when I was a rep, and I'm a sales guy, right? I was a mid-market sales guy, an enterprise sales guy, a global account manager, moved into sales leadership. I'm a sales guy through and through. The feedback loops weren't great, right? I was the large enterprise account manager in Florida. Like, my boss didn't have time to go on every call at Disney with me or to go to, Price Waterhouse and give me feedback on my calls. So the ability to review your own work, the ability to look across the company and being able to role model every top sales rep, the ability to, apply a degree of artificial intelligence and say, just show me the winning calls or show me how we compete against this particular competitor, is the greatest educational thing I've seen for a sales rep, literally in the past decade. From a sales leadership perspective, it's nice. We're able to dip in. I think when we first installed it, people thought it was Big Brother, and we were looking into the calls to say, like, you messed this up, you need to do better. Like, literally, that's not it. We look into the calls to say, hey, man, like, you're working so hard and doing all these calls. If you tweaked this one thing, you'd probably get a 10% higher close rate. Like, let us help you with that. So it's just incredible. Every single time I've joined a company in my life, the first thing the CEO tells me to do is, we'll go on 50 sales calls.
Yeah.
Right? Go on 50 sales calls, meet 50 partners, go meet 50 customers, etc. And you show up, and half the times those are terrible calls. You get stood up, it's late, it's the wrong agenda, it's too technical, it's not technical enough. Now we can literally just log in, and day one you can tell a rep, go into Gong, I've already built a catalog of 50 calls every sales rep should hear.
Yeah, you can build folders of like all your objections and the best reps, how they handle them, all sorts of things through the folders. And not to mention all the things that customers talk about on the calls, which you can capture through trackers. I don't know if you've used that, or if you've garnered any wisdom from listening to customers and like applying that in your pitch messaging or on marketing, use it on the website. But that's a big use case for us, is like refining messaging and kind of like honing your product market fit, but by listening to all these calls. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, no, it's incredible. I get all these random calls from, marketing will call and say, like, hey, how often are you hearing XYZ customer? Mm-hmm. And historically, I would, kind of poll my team, like, hey, are you hearing this competitor come up at all? Mm-hmm. And I'd get some level of data, if you want to call it that, back. Now it's like, let's just go do a query. Show me the competitors' names that are coming up, how often they're coming up, and what people are saying about them. It's just, you truly get complete visibility into what is happening. One of the things we do with Gong that I learned from a good friend, Don Addington, a really smart CRO. He's over at a company called Tackle.io that helps put people in the Amazon marketplace, is to put people at ease with Gong, and also just for fun, they have a bloopers folder. So everyone's terrified. Like the system is now recording me. Like, I don't want it to catch me saying something dumb. And by exposing the fact that all of us say things dumb, certainly I've been on calls with customers where, the wrong word comes out, or my wife walks behind me, or you just do something dumb, that we're all humans. Capturing that and making light of it puts everyone at ease with the system.
Yeah. Or the cleaning crew comes in.
Exactly. Yeah. There have been a few bloopers that have to be permanently deleted, right? In a remote-only world where everyone's cameras are on and everyone's microphones on. Sometimes there's a couple bloopers that have to get permanently removed, but there's plenty of good-hearted ones out there.
Absolutely. And I know you're big on, you've said, get out of spreadsheets, talk to customers, but obviously a lot of decisions have to be made based on trend data, historical data. You're trying to make good decisions going forward because of data that you've gathered and structured and all that. So who do you rely on for that? If you're spending more of your time talking to customers and you're trying to get out of spreadsheets as much as possible, talk about the folks that you rely on and how you interact with them on an ongoing basis to make sure that you're getting the right data to make the right decisions.
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think if you rewind, I don't know whether it's 15 years ago or 10 years ago or 5 years ago, the more you went up into leadership, the more the knock was you'd spend all of your time in spreadsheets, right? You hear reps going, I don't want to go into leadership. All you guys do is spend time in spreadsheets. I think the world has evolved. I think there are some people that do that because they don't prioritize spending time with their employees or their customers. But it's just not a necessity anymore. There are, brilliant teams that are built out that specialize in, I guess the term we want to use in the past few years is RevOps. Mm-hmm. So it's, teams of people that are brilliant at this, right? We've got modern tools. We're a user of Insight Squared. A lot of people use Clary. I think almost everyone has, Salesforce. There's Tableau dashboards. There's Gong, but there's, experts within our company that they roll up into my function, right? So I've got a VP of RevOps, and they're able to capture all of that and report all that. And as opposed to me building all that, they're handing me the output of that, right? They're my peer and my leader's peers, and telling us exactly what metrics we're observing. And it's my job and my team's job to coach and to sell, right? The number one thing that I need my leaders doing, number one is to hire and fire, right? And if we're hiring right and coaching right, there isn't a firing. But what I tell my leaders is number one is hire a world-class team, whether you're a senior vice president or a first line manager. If you hire great people, the rest will by and large take care of itself. Right? If you hire people that have great attitudes, a thirst to learn, they're eager, they don't have a sense of entitlement, they like the company they work for, they're good humans, by and large, the rest will take care of itself. When you grow into a large corporation, you end up with, kind of A's, B's, and C players, and occasionally, some D's and F's. The systems do help sort through all of that. But I want my managers spending time with customers and employees so they can learn and being enabled to have all that data coming out of their RevOps team.
Mm-hmm. So on a weekly basis, how do you, because it's easy to fall back into spending time looking at the numbers and all that stuff, and it's easy to waste a ton of time doing that when you should be, like you said, talking to customers, coaching reps, closing deals. But how do you, in practice, reinforce that on a daily basis to make sure that that RevOps is doing their job and your analysts are doing their job and your salespeople aren't wasting their time, overanalyzing or over reporting and doing all that stuff? Like, what are the tactics that you found work to reinforce that?
Yeah, so the first, as I mentioned earlier, Dan, comes down to the calendar, right? So if people build their calendar in advance and they prioritize spending time with their employees and their customers, and it takes priority over everything else, that solves a good chunk of the problem. In the same way that many people have to block out time on their calendar to exercise, or their exercise won't get done, or block out there's family time, or that will get kind of run over. If you don't block off time to spend with your customers and with your employees, it will get overrun. Yeah. The time then has to get broken down into what are the actual activities you're going to do. So, for example, if we don't block off time for prospecting, we end up spending all of the time on the top 10 deals. If we don't spend time on our employee review saying we're going to talk about career path for our employees and development, we end up talking about the top 10 deals. If we don't end up blocking off time to talk about, the pipeline 2 quarters out, we end up talking about the top 10 deals. So, step one is making sure the calendar is built to make sure that people are spending their time where they should be, and it's not getting overrun with interlock meetings and one-on-one cross-functional meetings, et cetera. All those things that overrun our calendars.
Yeah.
Number two is these tools that we have now are just unbelievable. So, again, we use Insight Squared. I've got friends in the industry that use Clary. A lot of this I've seen companies home grow, through BI tools like Tableau. But the ability for a RevOps team to sit down with a rep and say, like, I just want to show you your customer. So here, for example, I could look at a rep now and say, you have 50 named customers. I'm going to show you based on your email and your calendar and your Zoom activity where you're spending your time and where you're not. I can literally sit down and go, like, hey, just so you know, on 7 of your top prospects, 7 of the companies that we've determined have the highest propensity to buy software like ours, you haven't touched them in the last 3 months. And then we can program the software to even proactively notify them. This doesn't even require a human anymore. I can literally tell the software just to give them an action and say, hey, by the way, you're the quote unquote named account manager on XYZ Fortune 500 company, and you literally haven't talked to a single new person there in the past 90 days. Like, maybe you should do that. Or maybe you should just let us know that you're so busy and you're at 200% of plan, you're deeply involved, and 50 accounts is way too many. I only need 20 accounts, and I should go hire 2 more people, which is often the case as well, right? I've had plenty of reps that say, boy, I would love to, but I've got these 3 multi-million-dollar sales cycles. I just don't have time to get to those. At which point, that's a phenomenal problem to have. It's time to grow and split. Mm-hmm. But our RevOps team and the sales leaders, and it's getting to the point now where the software by itself can notify people where to spend their time.
Wow, that's pretty impressive. And so you've got, using your calendar wisely, you got the tools, and then going back to something you said earlier, it's you're coaching people how to spend their time based on the top goals of the company. I mean, you mentioned net retention as one of the top KPIs that you guys look to as like the North Star and that you're driving towards? Any others that are like at the very strategic level that you're always talking about? I'm assuming new bookings, customer acquisition number, or ARR or MRR, whatever, however you guys measure it, net retention. Any others that you guys are constantly driving towards or focusing on?
Yeah, so they're the standard metrics, right? So it's new bookings, it's customer retention, it's net retention. We look at average deal size, and you've got to kind of break that down between land and expand. We look at new logos, right? You can only go so deep into your customer base unless you're doing, lots of organic product development or M&A. So you need to kind of track new logo acquisition. We're starting to get into more geographic tracking. So, we look today at Americas versus EMEA versus Japan versus APAC. But within that, there's some interesting things. Like if you go into EMEA, how are we doing in Germany relative to France? So we're starting to get a little bit more thoughtful on that. And some of that also helps with where do you allocate your dollars, right? So where do you allocate marketing dollars when you get incremental headcount? Where do you put them, et cetera? We also look at expense to booking. So we look at, where we're spending our money versus where we're getting our return. And then when we kind of shift into the marketing function, which is super interrelated with sales, we get all the pipeline metrics. So how much pipeline are we creating? How many MQLs, how many SQLs? And my partner in crime, Jen Smith, who is our CMO, she's driving us into a process now where we're not tracking, just the number of MQLs and SQLs. We're tracking the actual revenue attributed with them. So, because ultimately, and I say this again and again, like I don't pay the bills with MQLs. Like when we get on the earnings call, no analyst says like, how many SQLs did you add this past quarter? The ultimate question is, what is the raw dollars being added to the pipeline, attributed all the way down to the rep level? And the amazing thing now to kind of complete the modern tech stack is we're able to look and see what happens in between. So, if we're delivering a great pipeline to reps, or what we think is a great pipeline to reps, and the close rate isn't, above industry norms, and that's my expectation, is we should be getting above industry norms because we hire above average people and invest more dollars in their training and education. We have the ability to go in with them and inspect their work down to every single call. To your point earlier, there's artificial intelligence that can build in trackers to say, are you following our sales methodology? Are you highly educated on what we do? Do you understand, how to build a business value proposition with the end user? And it's exposed for the whole company to see. So product can see it. So when they think they built the world's most perfect product, they can go in there and listen to customer feedback around where it is perfect or where there's gaps. Marketing can go in there and listen. Did the sales reps deliver the marketing message they delivered? Did they deliver it well? How did customers receive it, et cetera? So there's kind of complete visibility into this now.
Yeah. All right, last question for you. You just said hiring great people. You said hiring above average people is something you're obviously always shooting for. Everyone always is. But what have you discovered about hiring as the CRO at Brightcove, as the top revenue leader at previous companies? What have you discovered about hiring that everyone else is still trying to figure out?
This is a super big hot button for me.
Okay.
What I've figured out about hiring is that I am not a great interviewer. And the shocking thing is I spent years of my life in sales leadership thinking I was. And the analogy I use is kind of like the NFL, right? You look at all these head coaches when they do their drafts, and they've done all the statistics. Like these coaches and general managers, by and large, are pretty terrible at picking who the next great player is. You see them trade up and trade down. They've got their draft boards, and you've got the NFL Combine. Like statistically, they've proven they're not that great at it. Like Bill Belichick, who's one of the most successful coaches, a lot of his success was by just getting more picks. Like, how do I trade so I get more chance at this somewhat random event? That way I could increase my chance of output. I spent years of my life thinking that I was a great assessor of talent. I thought I could ask great questions. What would you do in this scenario? Tell me how you solved this problem. Give me 3 examples of this. I may have even, at some point in my career experimented with like those silly questions like, why don't manhole covers fill in? Or if you were an animal, what animal would it be? And I look back at my track record and it was, I don't know, somewhat mediocre. And then, as I moved up into leadership, I watched people that work for me kind of go down the same path. And I asked, like, what qualifies any of us to spot great sales talent? Like, what training have you been through? What have you ever done to actually be good at this? And then, the biggest hires just mathematically are the first line leaders. So often the first line leaders have only been in sales leadership for a short period of time. Their job is to go pick great talent. Like, we put them through no training and they're out there and it's kind of like the blind leading the blind.
Yeah.
And I stumbled upon a book written by a guy named Jeff Smart, Geoff. And he has a company called GH Smart, and the book is called The Who. It's available on Amazon. I don't have any affiliation with Jeff. I've never talked to him. I've never hired him. I think I've ordered a couple hundred copies of his books at $8.95, and I often tell people there's some YouTube videos of him talking. They're every bit as good. And the book talks about a lot of things, but the most pointed thing that was a game changer for me is he essentially said, if all you could do is go back to an individual's prior leadership team, the people they work directly for, and say, would you hire this person again? Like, were they a great employee? If that's the only data point you had, you'd probably have an 85% hiring success rate. Mm-hmm. So if I were able to go back in your background, Dan, and talk to the people you worked with at your prior lives, even going back into your, college days or sports teams you were on, if I could just simply ask them, to tell me on a 10-point scale, how would you rate Dan? If they all came back and said, exactly, you hold up 10, if they all came back and said 10s, my guess, I could probably put you in any role that you're reasonably qualified for, and you would figure it out and do an absolutely phenomenal job. And this book and this guy, Jeff Smart, he walks this methodology where he takes you through a person and asks the candidate, when I talk to your prior boss on a 10-point scale, how will they rate you? And it's pretty interesting. So they ask a question like, hey, Dan, at your prior life, tell me, who was it you resigned to at your last company? And you would say, it was Jim Smith, vice president of marketing. And Jeff preaches, even if they say Jim Smith, you say, great, how do you spell Smith? And at that point, you're kind of sending a shot over the bow that, you can't make stuff up.
Not messing around, yeah.
Not messing around. And then you ask the question, hey, we're pretty far along in the interviews. This is obviously a very desirable job. We're looking to make sure we get, the best of the best, that this is a perfect match for both sides. When we talk to Jim Smith, and it's not if we talk to him, it's not, what would he say? It's when we talk to him or her, what will they say? And they call this the torque, the threat of reference check. And boy, people fold. I mean, the dances you hear of, you have to understand, that guy, he just didn't get it. And by the way, there are some people that just didn't get it. We've all had a boss or heard of a boss that didn't get it or was the wrong fit, etc. But it's 1 out of 10. When you start seeing the pattern of, oh boy, it's usually a really bad sign. And a really great sign, and you see this more times than not, is, oh, Jim would tell you that I was phenomenal, and I had dinner with him last week. You should call him. Mm-hmm. And then, to complete this, the most important thing is that managers actually do the reference checks. And this isn't, hey, give me 3 references, because, I think everyone can find 3 people to say nice things about them. You literally have to find the name of the person that they resigned to in every job they've ever had and the person that hired them, get their names, do the heavy lifting. And the book also trains on how to do a reference call, because the call can't be, hey, was Dan a good guy? because typically if they're giving you the name and the number, the person's going to say nice things. What you have to figure out is where are the gaps. So he'll teach little things like, boy, we love Dan. He's made it through 7 interviews. People rave about him. We're going to put him on a team with a few other people to support him. What are some characteristics we should look for in other people to surround him to get the most out of him? And at that point, they might go, well, boy, you should probably get him an EA because he can't keep track of anything. He's late to lots of things. He's great on the air. He's a great interviewer, but organizational skills, not his cup of tea. So by framing the questions in terms of, what skills would you put next to him to help him be his greatest, people that are supporters will begin to show you some gaps. So the book walks you through a process to really understand what people have done, not what do they say they would do, not these hypothetical situations, and how to do these deep reference checks. When I've followed this process, my hit rate is extraordinary. And at times I think, we all get moving fast, especially today when it's so hard to find talent. And at times I found myself skipping some of these steps, and it's bit me in the butt. So the one thing I tell every single person that moves into sales leadership and every person that works for me, go out, get this book. If you don't have time or the desire to read a 200-page book, find a 15-minute YouTube video, listen to it. If you can't implement the whole methodology, implement the torque methodology, and understand, what people's prior leadership team, customers, and employees say about that person. Not what would they say, what will they say?
That's incredible. And once again, this is not an endorsement, but the book is The Who by G.H. Smart, correct?
That is correct.
Awesome. Well, Brian, it's been awesome chatting with you for the last 45 minutes or so. Thanks so much for coming on the show and for all your insights on really modern revenue leadership, sales management, planning, and talking to customers, and most importantly, probably hiring. So thanks for joining the show, Brian, and hope to catch up with you down the road soon.
Thanks a ton for having me, Dan.